Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the Taylor Leadership Institute, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today for the 9th Annual Student Leadership Summit. And I think we've got a terrific program for you today. I'm Rick Tryon. I'm the director of the Taylor Leadership Institute, and I'm going to serve as your MC for this morning. And I think we've got an exciting program for you. We're going to explore a theme that is becoming increasingly relevant and popular. We're going to talk about leading beyond boundaries, how cultural intelligence creates global leaders. And you know, having I'm going to be technically challenged here. My TQ is not very good. Okay, so I think we're off here. There we go. Okay. All right, folks. This is who I am, and as we step through this now, what I want to do is basically kind of give a little bit of a testimonial to the topic of cultural intelligence. You know, having served over 44 years as a military officer and traveling around the globe quite a bit, I can personally attest to the importance of cultural intelligence in an increasingly complex and complicated world, yet one that is becoming ever so more interconnected. And I think, as you can see from this particular quote, okay, we're backwards. This particular quote from our very own Dean Dawkins, that he feels pretty much the same way. You know, I have every confidence that you'll leave here today empowered with a greater understanding of CQ leadership and its value to leaders at all levels, both here at home in the United States as well as across the global domain. Like all of our leadership summits in the past, today's goal is to provide you with a unique opportunity to first reflect on yourself as a leader, second, to become more actively engaged in your own leadership development through the intentional study of today's leadership topic, using reflection and thoughtful dialogue. Third, to make new relationships and create strong connections with those at your table and beyond. And fourth, as always, we want to have fun in the process of doing this here today. So before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping announcements that I need to make. There are still some folks that will be trickling in from the outside lobby area. And for my staff, I would encourage, as they come in, please fill the tables front to back. We still have some empty places up here in the front. We're delighted with the registration and the turnout today. This is a record number of students who have signed up for this program, for our summit. And so I'm absolutely delighted that we have this level of interest in today's topic. On your tables, you will find a sign-in sheet. And I ask all of you to please sign in so that we can account for your attendance here today. And I ask that the table captains to please help in this process, and then turn the registration form into either Lori Stanton or Corey Hilton, table captains, at the conclusion of today's events. Also, each of you should have a blue folder with the TLI logo at your place. In that folder, there are several important items. You should find an event program which includes today's schedule, a copy of the community table guidelines, which are intended to ensure constructive and respectful dialogue. You should find 2 exercise activity sheets and an evaluation form. Now, we're asking you also to please fill out the evaluation form and either leave it on the table, turn it into your table captain, or drop it off on the table in the lobby as you depart at the conclusion of today's summit. Now, a handful of you may also notice that inside your folder, there's a round green sticker. But congratulations. Okay, if you are one of the lucky individuals to have this sticker, please bring it. Please bring your folder to a TLI staff member, and you'll have the opportunity to pick out a great UNF branded item, which includes shirts, cups, hats, keychains, all generously donated by the UNF bookstore. Okay, this year's summit is unique in that it will explore a topic that is both relevant at home and abroad. Cultural intelligence is a critical capability for effective leadership in our multicultural global world. To help us examine this topic, there are 2 interactive sheets in your folder, one of which is focused on CQ values, and the other which is going to be focused on CQ scenarios. Following Dr. Upton's presentations here today, table captains will facilitate a discussion on each of these activities respectively, and at the conclusion of the second activity, we will invite you to share your respective learning outcomes. You are asked out of courtesy to our speaker here today to please silence your smartphones, your iPhones, so that you can give the speaker your undivided attention throughout the course of the presentation. And finally, I think, as most of you know, the restrooms are located out and to the left around in the lobby area. I want to point out over in the left corner of the room, you can see what is known as the Human Race Experience Machine. Now, we have serendipitously coordinated with the Intercultural Center for Peace and have the Human Race Experience Machine set up for your use today. And I want to thank Sheila Spivey, Director of the Department of Diversity Initiatives, and Upa Siane, Head of the Intercultural Center for Peace, for allowing us to use this machine. What this machine will do, it will allow you to visualize, digitally visualize yourself as a member of another race, another ethnicity. And so you'll be able to see a picture and send the picture to yourself on your cell phone or on your computer and kind of capture that. So what I'll tell you is that the Human Race Machine only provides you with a visualization, not the experience of what it's like to walk in the shoes of a member of another race. It's a pretty cool machine. It's available for your use following our program here today. And in addition to this machine, I hope you all noticed that out in the lobby area, we have a photo booth. So table captains, if you want to try to herd cats and corral your table and get a picture, or if there are respective groups here today that would like to get a picture taken, it's free. Please avail yourself of that. At this time, I'd like to introduce the staff of the Taylor Leadership Institute, beginning with the Assistant Director and Professor for Leadership Minor Practicum, Dr. John Frank. John, will you identify yourself here, please? Okay. I like to tell people that John is the brains of our outfit. Our events coordinator, who has done an absolutely spectacular job here today setting up this summit, is Miss Corey Hilliard. Corey, off to the side here. I can't begin to tell you the great work that Corey has done pulling this together. And the newest addition to our TLI staff, but no stranger to the University of North Florida, is Miss Lori Stanton, who has previously worked in the College of Computing Engineering and Construction, and we're delighted that we are able to steal her and bring her over to the Taylor Leadership Institute. Lori, where are you hiding? Lori is out in the lobby herding cats. That's what she's doing. Okay. And regretfully, not with us this morning is Dr. Matt Olson, faculty liaison for the Institute and professor of Introduction to Leadership. And so to my staff, I just want to say thanks a lot. Where's Miss Lori? Hi, Lori. There she is. Yay. Yay, Lori. I want to say to my staff, thank you very much for your good work, your hard work on this, the late hours and whatnot. In addition, we have two federal work-study young men, Johnny Ballard and Sariq Allen. Where are you guys heading? Johnny's over here, and where's Sariq? He's out in there, in the back. Okay. These guys have folded into TLI, and they're great teammates. We're delighted to have them. And I want to finally thank Dr. Diane Taylor for corralling a number of unnamed volunteers who showed up on time and facilitated with the setup of all the tables here today. So, Diane, thank you very much for pitching in and helping. So before we continue, with this morning's program, I'd like to point out that we're extremely fortunate to have a number of campus and community leaders with us, each assigned to one of your tables to help facilitate the two interactive exercises as part of today's program. And at this time, what I'd like to do is ask the table captains to stand up and briefly introduce themselves. And what I'd like to do is start with table number one right here. So over to table one.
Good morning. I'm Mark Dawkins, Dean of the Coggin College of Business, and happy to be with you today.
Hello, I'm Ann Flipsy. I'm a retired physician, and for the time that I've been in Jacksonville, I've enjoyed being involved with the University of North Florida, and I currently am on two of the Dean's Councils, one at Brooks College and the other one, the Student Affairs Community Council, which I'm chairing at this time. And I just can't stay away from students.
Don Hutton. I'm with the Brooks College of Health. I'm the director of the Brooks College of Health Leadership Institute. I teach leadership for undergraduates and graduates. Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Okay, so she's 4, and then you'll be 5.
Good morning. I'm Jill Dame. I'm the CEO of a local nonprofit called Leadership Jacksonville. And what we do is we educate, connect, and inspire diverse leaders from all over Northeast Florida to build and strengthen our community.
Good morning. I'm Maria Mark, and I am the program coordinator for the Environmental Leadership Program that is at the Environmental Center here at UNF. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Diane Taylor, and with Taylor Leadership Institute, and I teach Introduction to Leadership, and I've taught it since Dr. Ken Wilburn first wrote the course, and I'm thrilled to see so many of my students here today.
Captain Upton, retired Navy captain. I have been a member of the Student Affairs Community Council for about 13 years on the leadership subcommittee. I'm a frequent contributor on leadership to General Tryon's class, and this is my 4th summit. And I want to applaud everyone for putting this together. Great turnout, and I think we'll have a lot of fun. My 2 daughters, both Ospreys.
Good morning. My name is Greg Kinder. I'm the transition coach at the Military Veterans Resource Center. I'm retired Navy Command Master Chief, 30 years. I've traveled 28 countries in my career. I've lived in several countries, and I enjoy the diversity, and I'm excited about the topic and looking forward to our talks. Thank you.
My name is Army Major Carlos Aviles. I'm the lead professor of military science here with the Army ROTC program here at UNF. I have over 26 years of military experience, both stateside and overseas assignments. I'm a veteran of operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and New Dawn. Culture intelligence is a force multiplier for our military in our counterinsurgency strategy. So us learning cultures, how their customs, traditions, all that, that's how we win our hearts and minds in our global war on terrorism. So thank you for being here. And I have some RTC cadets here. So if you want to come over and learn about RTC, thank you very much. Also, we partnership with the Taylor Leadership Institute in their leadership minor. We are fortunate that they don't have to take all 12 credit hours. Just by virtue of being in the RTC program, they are granted 3 credit hours. So thank you very much, Taylor Leadership Institute.
Here you go. Your turn.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. I am the principal at San Jose Academy and Preparatory High School, and I'm here today with my student ambassadors, and I'm going to have them stand so you can see them all. So they range from 8th grade to 12th grade. Wave to the crowd, wave to the crowd. There they go. Have a seat. We are a charter school in Duval County, and we are a very diverse charter school. And this year I started a student ambassador program. So when I saw this opportunity, I thought this is wonderful. And our students are so committed to learning more about cultural intelligence that most of them drove here. So that shows their motivation. And thank you for having us.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Dave Reed. I've been a carpenter, a ski bum, a bartender, a disc jockey, a bar manager. I've engineered on a dozen gold and platinum records. I've managed 2 major studios in Hollywood. I've started a production company with Kiefer Sutherland. I've worked for ESPN on Super Bowls, X Games, and World Series. I have 2 degrees from the University of North Carolina. I have an MBA from the University of Florida. I've started 2 companies here in Jacksonville, and I'm hoping to get my PhD in business so I can spend the rest of my days at a wonderful institution such as UNF, where I currently serve as the leadership chair of the Student Affairs Community Council.
Hi, I'm Meg Folds, and that's a tough act to follow. I work with Jill at Leadership Jacksonville, so you heard a little bit about our organization. I am the director of youth programs, so I run our high school program and our college program. I've already seen some of our alumni and thrilled to be here with y'all, and encourage those of you that have not been a part of our program. Little commercial here, if you don't mind. We do a collegiate program in the summer, and we have worked with the Taylor Leadership Institute and a number of the departments at UNF for many, many years for them to recommend students to us. It takes place during the summer, and it is a very interactive, experiential leadership program that allows you to do a whole lot of networking and really get engaged in leadership in our community. So thrilled to be here, and thank you.
My name is Kelly Harrison. I'm the director for the Center for Professional Development Training here at UNF. We're responsible for all the development training for our staff here at the university. My connection to the Taylor Leadership Institute is I'm a guest speaker in General Tryon's honors leadership class. I go in and teach Kiersey temperament and how that applies to your individual leadership style.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ruth Lopez. I'm the Senior Director of the International Center, and we have some international students here with us today. If you guys can stand up, don't be shy, wave.
All right.
We have international students representing over 66 countries here at UNF. We have over 300 international students, and every year we send over 700 students abroad. So when you're ready to practice your cultural intelligence out in the world, come to the International Center so you can study abroad and be part of the global community. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marisha Bishop. I'm working with Sheila Spivey in the Department of Diversity Initiatives. This is really on the fly, so this is my first time doing this, but I welcome the opportunity. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rudy Jamison. I teach out of the College of Education. I also work out of the Center for Urban Education and Policy. I'm happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Valerie Robinson with Career Services. We help students swoop, so come see us, start planning for your future career. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tara Rowe. I'm a current doctoral student in the Educational Leadership Program, and I'm hopefully graduating this December. I actually am the Assistant Director of the Disability Resource Center here on campus, and I've spent several years teaching and leading overseas in remote villages and working with community leaders on education.
I am Dr. Edward Labi, originally from Ghana, West Africa. I'm a professor at Taylor Leadership Institute teaching Introduction to Leadership.
One more.
I thought I beat the rep because I was outside. Good morning. My name is Opa Siani, and I'm originally from South Africa. I've lived in 5 countries, and I love and appreciate diversity. Diversity means all of us. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's everybody. Opa, we saved the best for last, obviously. Okay. And I think as you look around the room and reflect on those brief introductions, that you can see that we've got a talented, experienced, if not eclectic, group of table captains here with us today to help guide conversations as we move forward. I want to thank the table captains very much for volunteering your time to be with us here today and to contribute to this very meaningful session that we're going to have on cultural experience. So, cultural intelligence, or cultural quotient. What is it? Leadership is unquestionably a multicultural challenge. Bridging cultural divides is essential in business, in politics, in the military, in government, and in education. Today we are competing in a global marketplace, managing a diverse workforce, and trying to keep pace with rapidly shifting trends at home and abroad. For the United States, cultural intelligence really starts at home. We are a nation of immigrants, and even within our country, there's an element of cultural regionalism that we must acknowledge. You only have to look at social media, TV, or any of the media outlets to see how we struggle with our own CQ awareness. Now, to help us navigate through this very interesting, intriguing topic, we are most fortunate to have with us today our keynote speaker, Dr. Sandra Upton. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about this extremely impressive lady. Dr. Upton is the Vice President of Educational Initiatives with the Cultural Intelligence Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan, also known as CQC. And she's responsible for leading the center's educational initiatives. She has over 20 years' experience training and consulting with universities and businesses around the globe. She leads CQC's response to the growing demand from various institutions and corporations such as the Harvard Business School, the London School of Economics, the University of Michigan, Starbucks, Google, Amway, Gordon Food Services, and hundreds of other organizations that are committed to improving cultural intelligence of their teams in their particular profession or walk of life. As a former business school dean, Dr. Upton provided leadership for the Professional and Graduate Studies Division. She understands how to effectively integrate CQC assessment and unconscious bias and cultural intelligence training into educational and business settings. She has trained and traveled extensively around the world, including such places as Brazil, China, Israel, Singapore, South Africa, and several other countries throughout Europe. She doesn't wear a watch because her time zones change so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sandra Upton.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Good morning, leaders. Good morning, good morning. I am just so happy to be here for a lot of reasons, but the weather is certainly one of them. Come from Michigan. Anybody ever been to Michigan during this time of year? Or maybe looking at the next month? It's a bit chilly. So I heard a few of you were complaining about it being a little chilly this morning here. You have no idea. No idea. But I'm very excited. The weather is one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here. But I am just delighted at the opportunity and privileged to spend some time with you all this morning. the fact that the university is making such a commitment to pour into you and to really help develop your leadership skills really is something that is to be commended, especially for such a time as this when you look at all of the things that are happening in our country and in our world. And so I think time is gonna move pretty fast this morning, but there's quite a bit of information that I do want to get to you and really want to make sure that we have some good quality time for interaction and digestion of the information that I'm going to share with you. So as you know, it'll be broken up into two parts. I had 45 minutes. I'm supposed to stop at 10 so that you can have some time to dialogue. I might go over maybe 5 minutes to get through all of my content, but you'll certainly, again, have quality time to have some discussion around some of the things that I'm going to share with you during part one of our time together this morning. But I thought I would start out by talking a little bit about my background. So I've been with the Cultural Intelligence Center for the last 3.5 years on a full-time basis. Dr. David Livermore, who is the president of the Cultural Intelligence Center, he and I go way back, and we've worked together over the years on numerous projects and actually worked together in higher education, which I was in that space for over 20 plus years. But as I was thinking about getting ready for this and talking with you, I was thinking about my own journey in terms of my career and my work. And I thought back to when I first started working in higher education years ago, around your age or ages. I started out working as an admissions counselor and did the job well and was pretty successful in it, so successful that they approached me after about 9 months that I was at. It was a small college back in Michigan. They approached me about 9 months into that position and offered me a leadership opportunity. And I jumped from admissions counselor to like a vice president position in a very short period of time, and was excited about the opportunity, but quickly learned when I made that transition how much I did not know about leadership. And I was a perfect example of what they call the Peter Principle. Any of you familiar with the Peter Principle? That's that whole idea of you can be in a position like I was, the admissions director or the admissions counselor, doing a fantastic job. And they saw that, and so they said, here's somebody that has potential. So we're going to put them in a leadership position, and even though they have no leadership experience. And that's what happens. So that Peter Principle is when you actually get promoted into a position that you actually don't have the skills for, but people assume that you do because you were very successful in the previous position. And so I had all kinds of challenges as a leader. I made it through. It was one of the best lessons of my life, and I was so glad that I learned that lesson very early on, so that as I continued to grow and assume different other leadership positions, I was much more successful. But as I thought back to that, I thought about how when I was in college, undergrad in particular, I had not really taken advantage of things like you're doing now. You're all in leadership positions here, and it's, I think, just a really smart decision for you because it gives you a jump and sort of a head start on beginning to understand what leadership is really all about and how there is a big distinction between having the technical skills or having the knowledge and actually having leadership skills. And so I think back to that experience, and had I had more leadership experiences and opportunities while I was in college, the challenges that I had when I stepped into that VP role, not that I would not have had any, but I think they would have probably been minimized a little bit. So I say all of that to say kudos to you all for stepping up and stepping into leadership positions now as students, because it's only going to serve you very well and actually give you sort of an edge as you work your way through your college career and then eventually into your jobs and professions in terms of whatever it is you want to pursue. So that's important. The other thing when we talk about cultural intelligence and why this conversation is important and why it's important for you as leaders is because of what I just mentioned. There is so much going on in our world and in our country and on our campuses today, such that we cannot ignore it, right? And if you are going to be in a leadership position, even here on campus, these are the kinds of things that come up that are impacting all of us. And it'll be part of your responsibility and task to help navigate through some of these challenges so that we continue to work to create an inclusive, diverse and inclusive and equitable campus community.
I travel all over the world. As was mentioned in my introduction, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of universities across the globe, and it's been exciting and fascinating to see the commitment, the level of commitment that universities are now making. Many of them are trying to be proactive. Some of them are reacting to all of the challenges, but nonetheless, people are engaging because they see that this is such an important conversation. I showed this picture here of this young Muslim woman because when you talk about some of the challenges that we're facing on campuses and things that you will deal with as leaders, she reminds me of a young woman, a young Muslim woman student that I was talking to a few weeks ago when I was at another campus, and she talked about how she no longer wears her hijab because she is so worried about her safety, even on a college campus. So again, when you think about the tensions around all of the discussions and things that are going on, it's creating all kinds of fear and uncertainty by so many of us, and it's impacting our campuses. So again, your responsibility as leaders is to help navigate and help create a culture where someone like the young lady that I was talking to doesn't have to fear for her life when it comes to being who she is and bringing her full self into the campus community. So those challenges that are taking place, that's a big reason why leadership is important for you and being culturally intelligent leaders is important for you. Another reason I was really excited to hear about your international students. I didn't realize that the number was over 300 international students. You said 66 countries now, and then you send a lot of students abroad. That is phenomenal, and I imagine that those numbers will continue to grow. But when we look at the realities on our campus, there was a study that was done just 2 years ago that said that 40% of international students studying in the U.S. have no close American friends and say that they wish that they had more meaningful interactions with those born in the U.S. So while we get excited about our numbers, the reality is that even when our international students come onto our campuses, they don't always feel welcome and included and connected. So they can be here for a full 4 years or whatever that time period is, and actually can leave and not feel like they've developed any kind of meaningful relationships, right? So that's important for you as student leaders, again, as you lead the various organizations and you're interacting with students from all over the world. How are you helping to play a role in making sure that international students are feeling comfortable and feeling welcome here, okay? That's another reason why this is important. But if we think beyond your college experience and your college career, and we fast forward, so I know we've got a wide range of students from freshmen to maybe some seniors in the room. We've got some high school students and some middle school students, which is great. But if all of you could kind of fast forward, the next 4, maybe to 8 years, and you think about where you're going to be in terms of your career, I can promise you, when we talk about this conversation on cultural intelligence, I can promise you that it is no longer an option, but it is an expectation that when you walk into the corporate space and even the nonprofit space or government, whatever that industry is, it is now an expectation that you come in with a high level of cultural intelligence, right? So if you look at the statistic, 90% of leading executives from 68 countries said finding effective cross-cultural personnel is a top management challenge. So there's the expectation, but yet they're struggling with finding those students, right? And it's interesting. So I talked about the fact that I work with hundreds of universities around the world. 2 of our biggest educational partners are University of Michigan. Anybody familiar with the Go Blue folks up there? Okay. But University of Michigan, we do a lot of work specifically with their School of Business, and they now require every incoming student in their College of Business at the undergrad level, at the graduate level, and any student that participates in any kind of study abroad or international program, they have to take our cultural intelligence assessment because they are determined that when those students graduate, not only are they smart in terms of their marketing or their accounting or human resources, whatever their major might be, but they recognize that they have to be able to tell and demonstrate to employers that our students are graduating and they have cultural intelligence, right? So it is an expectation. We work a lot with major companies around the world. So some of our biggest partners around the world are Google and Facebook and Starbucks. They tell us all the time, this is what they're looking for, right? But here's the reality, right? So there was a study that was done just a couple of years ago, and the study looked at and talked with employers around some of the skills that they were looking for when it came to students that were graduating and coming into their companies. So they interviewed several employers, but they also interviewed students. And it's amazing when you look at the difference in terms of how students perceive themselves and their level of readiness and how employers perceive these students in terms of, so these were students who had actually graduated and gone inside these organizations, and these are the things that they said. So a couple of them that I want to highlight. So Again, the study looked at employers and students. A couple of these talk about things like working with other people, so working with other teams. This one here, working with people from different backgrounds. So the dark blue represents employers, the light blue represents students. So if we look at working with people from different backgrounds in terms of how they feel these people or students were prepared, 55% of the students said, I got this. Yes, absolutely, I know how to work well with people from across cultures. Employers were like, not. 18% of the employers said it. So students were 3 times more likely to see themselves or believe that they were culturally intelligent and able to work. So there's this gap, right, in perception and even in some ways reality in terms of readiness. So again, the fact that you are here having this conversation, being part of this conversation, and recognizing that this is a skill that is important for you, not only in terms of your success as a student leader here, but once you graduate, is huge. Okay, so as we spend time this morning in part 1 and part 2, there are really 3 things that I want you to be able to walk away with. Okay, so and I want you to start thinking about those things now, because when we come back to it at the end of our time, I want you to sort of reflect on, did I get that? Did I accomplish those things that we set out to accomplish? So 1, I really want you to get why you need to be not just student leaders, but why you need to be culturally intelligent student leaders, right? So I just gave you a few examples of why in terms of what's happening in our world and the challenges that we're facing on our campuses, you know, the realities of the diversity when you talk about international students coming on our campus and the need to make sure that they're feeling connected and included. We've got the whole conversation around domestic diversity, right? So we've got students from a wide range of backgrounds that are right here in the United States, right here in the state of Florida, right here in the city of Jacksonville, and how are we making sure that we are staying connected, right? So understanding why it's important to you as a student leader. Secondly, I really want you to understand the influence of cultural values, which you're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about over the next 20 plus minutes, but the role that cultural values and unconscious bias play when we talk about leadership effectiveness. And then lastly, if nothing else, I want you to be able to walk away with at least 2 things, and they can be simple, practical things, but 2 things that you can do to improve your CQ during the remainder of the academic year. So as we're talking, processing, as I'm talking to you, as you are processing this at your tables, be thinking. So when we come back at the end, you're going to have in your head 2 things that you can do over the remainder of the year to improve your CQ. Okay, so what do we mean by cultural intelligence? So you heard the definition earlier, but I just want to repeat it because there are a couple of key words that I want to emphasize. So it is the capability to function or lead effectively across various cultural contexts. That can include national, ethnic, race, organizational, generational, disabilities. The list can go on and on and on. Key words there. First one, it is a capability. It is a skill. That's really important for you to understand. So it's not enough to just say, oh, I love working with people who are different from me. I thrive in that, and I think it's cool, and I just think it's wonderful. That's great, but that's an excitement, that's an interest, which is good, and we're going to talk about the role that plays, but that doesn't necessarily translate to skill. So it is a skill. It goes beyond just being sensitive to cultural differences. It goes beyond to being aware of cultural differences, but it is a set of skills that you need and can develop. But once you develop that set of skills, once you develop your cultural intelligence, it gives you the capability to function effectively in any cross-cultural context. So it doesn't just limit you to working with one cultural group. So yes, I'm going to develop my cultural intelligence. Now I can go to China and work well with students in that part of the world. Yes, you can, but you can also go to South Africa. You can also go across town. You can also work with people from different generations. You can also work with people from different genders. It enables you to work effectively across any cultural context. But it is a skill, okay? Some of the myths around cultural intelligence that I think are really important. The first one. So we just celebrated the fact that you've got a large population of international students. We celebrated the fact that you've got a lot of students that are studying abroad. But one of the biggest myths around this is that we assume that just because we've traveled internationally, just because we've gone abroad, that automatically makes us culturally intelligent. That couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, you can be dangerous if you don't have cultural intelligence, I have had the privilege of traveling to many, many places around the world. If I go into those places and I lack cultural intelligence, or I lack the capability to function effectively across any of those cultural contexts, the risk is that I go in with my own mindset, I go in with my Western worldview, and I expect them to just sort of adjust and adapt to me because my way is the right way, right? And so we can be really dangerous. I've traveled both, in higher education when I worked as the dean. I was really committed to making sure that all of our students, especially our MBA students, I wanted to make sure that they graduated with cultural intelligence. So we had a global business experience, and we took them they could choose from going to a couple of places in the world: South Africa, India, Israel, Central Europe, and China. And one of the things that we emphasized was, again, when we take you on these experiences, the goal is to develop your cultural intelligence. And so we would have students where we would go and they'd say, okay, where's the nearest McDonald's? They wanted to immediately find the most familiar thing. Or I work with global leaders around the world, and it's interesting to see how they interact across cultures. They go to places, and again, they assume that people are to cater to them, or if they go as an expat for their company, they want to go into this community that's created just for everybody that works for that company, right? So we become isolated, so we can kind of protect ourselves and kind of do things the way we are used to and are comfortable with doing things. So we cannot assume that just because we've had those experiences that automatically makes us culturally intelligent. At the same time, it's one of the best ways to develop your cultural intelligence. Exposing yourself to other cultures, exposing yourself to what's happening in the world, one of the best ways to improve your cultural intelligence, but you've got to go with the mindset that you're open to learning, and that your way is not the only way, okay? The second myth is that we assume that technical competence equals success. Not today. Google says not today. Facebook says not today. Starbucks says not today. The small nonprofit says not today. Whoever you go and work for, not today. Is that important? Absolutely. Do I want a doctor that's treating me and they don't understand, how to treat my disease? Absolutely not. But I also want a doctor that understands perhaps the cultural differences that might show up as they're treating me. So in today's globalized, multicultural world, having technical skills, being good at marketing, being good at being an attorney, being good at being a business leader, that is not enough. You absolutely have to have cultural intelligence. And then the last myth is that we assume that high EQ, emotional intelligence, equals high CQ. How many of you are familiar with the term EQ, emotional intelligence, right? So it is a form of intelligence. I always say we're a part of the same family. In fact, Goldman, who's one of the leaders and scholars behind that conversation, we know him. Dr. Livermore knows him quite well, and we see our work as complementing each other. But the difference between emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence is that emotional intelligence is all about self-awareness, so understanding yourself, also understanding how you interact with other people. What it doesn't do, it does not take culture into consideration, right? So I'm trying to understand how to work with someone else, but it's not thinking about it within the context of what might be some of the cultural differences that may be at play, that may have an impact on how effective or non-effective I am in that interaction. So we always say that CQ just takes things to the next level and considers culture. So if you feel like you have high EQ, that's important. It's really important, but you cannot stop there. You have to develop your intelligence as it relates to being able to work effectively across cultures. Okay? So when we talk about cultural intelligence and we break it down, again, it's the overall capability to function effectively in any cross-cultural context, but there are 4 key capabilities that we look at when we talk about your cultural intelligence, and we're going to break them all down. If we had time and if we had the resources, we would have actually had you take the CQ assessment. It's the only academically validated tool in the world that measures cultural intelligence. So when you take that assessment, you get your scores, you see what your overall CQ score is, but then you also see what your score is as it relates to these 4 capabilities. So what I want to do over the next 15 minutes is talk about these first 2 capabilities, and then after we have some time to do your first activity and we come back together, we're going to look at the second 2 capabilities. But in summary, there are 4 key capabilities when we talk about your overall CQ. CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, and CQ action. And they all work together. They're all important. And they all play a very special role in terms of developing your overall cultural intelligence. So when we talk about CQ drive, that's all about your interest, drive, and confidence in working across cultures. So if you're not interested, if you're not motivated, right, if you don't have confidence, that can have a negative impact on your success when working across cultures. So you remember when I started out earlier saying it's not enough to just be interested and excited? It's not enough, but it's an important piece of the puzzle, right? So if you're not motivated, if you don't have the confidence, that is an area that you absolutely want to work on. So drive is all about your level of motivation, your confidence, and interest in working across cultures. Then CQ Knowledge says, okay, I'm motivated, I'm excited, I'm interested, but I can't stop there. CQ Knowledge then says that's all about your understanding about how cultures are similar and how they're different, right? So I can be motivated, but if I don't take the time to develop some understanding of the cultures, I can just be motivated and still be very ineffective. But I'm going to take some time to develop. So CQ Knowledge is all about my understanding of how cultures are similar and how they're different, and that includes analyzing my own self and looking at my own culture, my own values, and how those show up when I'm interacting across cultures, which is a big part of the exercise that you're going to be doing in a little bit. Strategy then says, okay, I'm motivated, I'm excited, I'm confident, I'm developing some understanding around cultures and how we're similar and how we're different. Strategy then says, okay, so now what do I do with that information? How do I use that information to make sure that when I'm actually leading a group of other students from a wide range of cultures, maybe I'm over the international club, or maybe I'm over a fraternity or a sorority or whatever leadership role you might have, it's saying, okay, let me make sure I'm developing some understanding around the people that I'm leading, and then how do I use that information to develop a strategy for leading them in an effective way, right? So that's all about your awareness and ability to plan for those multicultural interactions. And then the last capability is what we call CQ Action. That's all about your behavior, your nonverbals, your verbals. So how do I plan for those interactions, but how do I actually behave? You know, if I'm interacting with someone, do I bow? Do I shake their hand? You know, when I was in Italy about a month ago, do I kiss on each cheek, you know? Do I make sure that I have coffee every time we have lunch every day? Yes, because that is part of the culture, right? So, you know, it's all about what behaviors are appropriate and what behaviors are inappropriate. So 4 key capabilities that all make up your overall cultural intelligence. You need all 4. They all work together. So drive, again, that's all about your motivation and your interest and confidence in working across cultures. So one of the things that we think about here is I can be interested, but am I confident? Am I confident? Do I feel comfortable? And sometimes the way we answer that question has a lot to do with how we were raised. So if you grew up in an environment that was pretty homogenous, and most of your time was spent with everyone who looked like you and acted like you and talked like you, sometimes stepping out of that may feel like a very different and foreign experience, and we can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable or intimidated by that experience. Not that it can't be improved, and that's one thing we talk about with cultural intelligence. There's a lot of conversation around whether or not your IQ can be adjusted. You know, there's some argument that says your IQ, it is what it is, and you're just stuck there. Others say it is malleable or can adjust. One of the things that we know for sure with cultural intelligence is that it absolutely can change, and it is malleable. So if you were to take the assessment and you saw your scores and you said, boy, there's some opportunity for me to develop in all 4 of these capabilities, the really good news is that it is a skill that can be developed and can be improved. So that drive, again, how motivated, how confident you are. If I were to just do a show of hands, how many of you would say that you feel like you're pretty motivated and excited to lead across cultures? How many of you would say that, generally speaking, you think you're pretty good at it? Okay, so half the room. Okay, good. So when we talk about CQ Knowledge, then, that's about your understanding of how cultures are similar and how they're different. And again, a big piece of that is understanding what your own cultural values are. And so there's been a lot of research when we talk about cultural values, and when you fill out the form in just a moment and kind of highlight where you think you fall in terms of your own cultural values, it's sort of your own self-evaluation, but we actually, again, we have an assessment that we could have you take where you actually can see where you fall. But lots of research has been done around cultural values, and that research has sort of landed on sort of what we call these 10 global clusters. And we look at where people around the world fall in terms of these values, and we know based on the research that in certain parts of the world, not to profile people or not to assume that every single person behaves a certain way, but we do know that there are a certain set of behaviors that are shared, certain set of values that are shared by a large percentage of people in that particular part of the world. Likewise, we know that, again, it doesn't mean that every single person has that value, but it gives us some insight around what might be some cultural values that guide how people from that particular culture might interact and how might that influence how I might lead them. Okay, so what I want to do is walk you through these 10 sets of values that we've looked at within these global clusters and kind of highlight the definitions, and then you're going to have some fun unpacking them in your smaller groups. So 10 sets of values. The first set of values that we like to look at is what we call individualism versus collectivism. So you can take notes, but you're going to get sheets in a moment in your first activity where you'll have a chance to kind of play with those. And as you're listening to me talk about the definitions, I want you to think about where you think, since you have not taken the assessment, we're going to leave it up to you to sort of do your own self-reporting and kind of think about where you fall in terms of these two different values. So individualism versus collectivism. So cultures or people who are more individualistic, they view the rights of the individual as more important than the rights of the group. Does not mean that they don't believe the rights of the group are important, it's just that the rights of the individual are much more important. Compare that to cultures or individuals who are more collectivistic, the rights of the group are much more important than the rights of the individual. Okay? Not that individual rights are not important, but group rights are just more important. So if you look at just these two on this continuum, where would you imagine that the United States as a country falls? Would you say we're more individualistic as a society? Absolutely, right. But did you know, so again, think about your leadership, think about the diversity that's in the room, think about all of the international students that are now part of campus. Did you know that the majority of the world is more collectivistic? The majority. So the U.S. is a minority, even when you talk about this particular set of values. So how does that show up when you're leading other students who may not be from the U.S.? More than likely, they probably have a different set of values than you, just in that category alone. It's interesting when you talk about leadership, and you look at it, and I want you to kind of think about this when you read leadership books, but most of the leadership books that are written by the Western world, and they come from an individualistic perspective. But yet the majority of the world is collectivistic. How does that work? Okay? So it's challenging us to think differently even about leadership. Okay? Second set of values, power distance. Low power distance, high power distance. So cultures or individuals or leaders who are low power distance, status and position are not that important. Tends to very much focus on teamwork, right? When you think about organizational structure, more of a flat type of organization, compare that to high power distance cultures. Status and position are much more important, right? So you can think about that on a lot of different levels. Most institutions, like universities, are more high power distance. You've got the president, you've got the chief diversity officer, you've got the deans, you've got faculty. Very hierarchical in terms of its approach. Just to give you an example, and I'm going to fast forward you into sort of the corporate space. Again, we work with a lot of global companies. So show you how this shows up, this whole power distance thing. So again, low power distance, status and position are not that important. High power distance culture, status and position, very important. Like, think about this in terms of leadership. True story. So one of our clients, a global company, they're actually headquartered in Michigan, but they have offices all over the world. They were in a meeting. It was one of the top vice presidents in a meeting with a team of people, and they were exploring the possibility of expanding their business into India. There were two women in the room who were Indian. And so the person who was leading the meeting was just facilitating the discussion and saying, okay, so, just want to get some ideas around some of the best ways to go into this market. And so they were having lots of discussion, and she felt really good about it. She felt like, okay, I'm kind of walking away from this with some really good ideas and strategies for how we can go into that market. She leaves the meeting, goes into the bathroom, goes into the stall. The two women from India come into the bathroom. They start talking amongst each other, not knowing she's in the bathroom. And they said, none of the ideas that she talked about will work. So can you imagine she's in the stall? What? But in that meeting, you all gave every impression that the ideas that well, if she understood power distance, If you know anything about that particular culture, they would never vocally disagree with someone in that high-level position because status and position are extremely important to them. So to publicly tell her, I don't think these ideas are going to work, that would never happen. So we brainstormed and we talked about, so what would be some culturally intelligent ways for you to respond to that situation as a leader? Well, you cannot expect them to share ideas, especially if they're different from yours publicly. So does that mean you may need to do some one-on-one meetings with them perhaps? Maybe have them give you information in writing, but you've got to think of some other ways to get feedback from them. Perfect example of leadership, right? And a set of cultural values that are different. And imagine had she not heard that conversation in the restroom. And she would have proceeded with her plans and ideas and then wondered why they weren't working. Cultural differences had nothing to do with her technical skills, but her understanding of the cultural differences that were represented on her team and her ability to navigate effectively based on that. Okay? Uncertainty avoidance. So individuals, leaders who are low uncertainty avoidance, flexible, risk takers, open to change. Compare that to individuals or cultures that are high uncertainty avoidance, much more risk adverse. They like things to be planned and predictable. Okay? Cooperative versus competitive. So cultures that are much more cooperative, emphasis is on collaboration, harmony, relationships, working together. That's the emphasis. Cultures that are more collectivistic, cultures that are more, competitive, much more focused on winning in the task. Now, does that mean that cultures that are more cooperative don't want to win? Not at all. They just want to win, but their focus is developing the relationships are more important. And they look at winning as let's build a relationship, and if we get the relationship piece right, then we position ourselves well to win. So as we talk about these cultural values and as you think about them within the context of your leadership and the people that you're leading, the key thing to remember is that there is not one that's better than the other. They're just different. And simply understanding those differences position you very well as a leader to begin to figure out how do I best lead this group and we accomplish the results that we want to accomplish. Time orientation, short-term versus long-term. So short-term cultures, emphasis is on quick wins, immediate results. Long-term cultures, willing to sacrifice the short term to get to the long term. So I should have asked you this. Where do you think the U.S. falls in terms of short term versus long term? Short term. Where do you think the U.S. falls in terms of cooperative versus competitive? Competitive. Where do you think the U.S. falls in terms of uncertainty avoidance? Actually low. Generally speaking, so again, doesn't mean that's one of the things when we talk about cultural values, is not designed for us to profile groups, but it's designed to give us some beginning insights around some of the cultural differences. Generally speaking, U.S. is actually more low uncertainty avoidance. Power distance. High or low? Low. Yep. As an overall culture. Yep. And then we talked about individualism being one. Okay. Context. So low context versus high context. Low context cultures are much more direct communicators. Yes means yes. No means no. High context cultures, yes might mean yes. It might mean no. It might mean later. It might mean maybe. It could mean a host of different things. For those of us who may be more direct communicators, can you imagine how frustrated you might get with someone that comes from a culture that's more indirect? The key is to, again, realize that it's just different. My way of communicating, I feel like it's better, because why can't you just say what you feel? I mean, how difficult is that, right? No. It may not be difficult, but there's a reason why somebody may communicate indirectly. If you don't understand that, you can miss all kinds of stuff because you can do like the woman that was leading the meeting, and the two women from India, the whole time she was talking, they were going like this. Yeah. And so you look at that like, I'm frustrated. Why didn't you just say what you meant? Well, if you understood the cultural differences, there's a reason why. Okay? Can you guess U.S., low context, high context? More low context. Look at cultures, if we think about these global clusters that I talk about, cultures like Latin America, much more high context, right? Bring that into the U.S., right? You look at, Caucasian culture versus the Hispanic Latino culture. Different. Not better, just different. Being versus doing. Cultures that are more being, they focus on the quality of life. Cultures that are more doing, focus on accomplishing the task. Very task-oriented. Where do you think the U.S. falls? Doing, off the chart. All right, so there's a scale that we use 0 to 100. I think US is like 99.9, right? And we actually pride ourselves on that. So much that a study that was done a couple years ago talked about the fact that only 14% of Americans took all of their vacation time that year, right? So the balance or the consequences are burnout and overworking. You look at places around the world like Norway and Sweden, the average work week, 35 hours a week. Our average work week, especially if you're in a leadership position, 50, 60 plus, right? So we look at that like, you're only working 35 hours a week. How in the world can you get your job done? They look at us like, why does it take you so long to get your job done? Seriously. Look at policies in terms of vacations and things like that. So again, imagine students that you're leading that come from those different cultures. Just how we work, how we go about life, how we view life, our perspective is just different. But it shows up and has a huge impact on how we interact, right? Universalism versus particularism. Universalistic types, universalism, that's where it's guided by rules and regulations, and there's very little room for flexibility, very little gray area. Cultures that are more particularistic, much more flexible, and a lot of it depends on the relationships. Okay? Where do you think the US falls? Universalism, for sure. Where do you think places like Germany fall? Universalism. Places like Latin America, perhaps. Particularism, right? Places like Sub-Saharan Africa, when we look at some of these global clusters. Relationships. Again, not better or worse, just different. Neutral versus effective. Cultures that are much more neutral don't tend to express emotion. In fact, they tend to hide those emotions. Compare that to cultures that are much more effective, they tend to be much more expressive. Okay? So where do you think the US falls? More neutral, right? Where do you think perhaps maybe the Asian culture might fall? A little bit more on the neutral side. What about the Hispanic culture? Maybe a little bit more on the effective side. African American culture, effective, right? Very expressive. Right? Generally speaking, does this mean that every single person in that particular culture shares that value? No, but generally speaking gives us some insight to see where the differences might show up. Okay, last one, monochronic versus polychronic. All these weird terms. All that simply means is a more monochronic culture tends to focus on one thing at a time, and they tend to have a clear separation between work and life. Polychronic cultures tend to mix all that stuff together, right? And when we talk about culture, so we've been kind of highlighting some of the racial and ethnic, but think about the generational differences, right? So where would the millennial culture fall compared to the baby boomer culture, right? So millennial, polychronic perhaps, right? Probably so, right? Think about gender differences, right? So all of these different kinds of diversities, when we think about cultural differences, they can show up in terms of how we interact. When I do our work in the corporate space, this is the first time in the history in the United States where all 4 generations are working together, right? And then you've got some more upcoming generations. And so it's a huge challenge in the workplace because of the different cultural values that these different groups bring inside the organization. Okay, so you've got these 10 sets of values, and what you're going to be tasked with is to think about these values and think about them within the context of your own leadership. So the first part of the process will be to kind of check off where you think you fall in terms of your own leadership. And then more significantly, I want you to think in your mind already about the different groups that are part of the organizations that you lead and where their values might fall. Might they be similar? Might they be different? And then the last part of what I want you to think about in your conversation as a table is the role that unconscious bias might play in that. We're going to talk in more detail about that in part 2. But initially, I want you to think about what bias is. So if I'm more individualistic and you are more collectivistic, what biases might I have towards you, especially if I think my value is the best way? So it sounds like there was some really good discussion. Interesting? Yeah. So anything that was surprising to you as you started thinking about your own leadership and your own set of values and thinking about the people that you lead? I want to make this very interactive, so they've given me liberty to do that. I know we're a big group, but we've got some microphones up here. Anybody have any thoughts that they want to share in terms of your discussion? Over here, yes. Mike, okay. We want to hear that.
So when we were discussing, we actually had a couple observations.
Yeah.
We found that one option doesn't necessarily exclude the other.
Mm-hmm.
We also thought that it was best to stay neutral, just to keep yourself like aware of the surroundings, but also, what did we say? I'm sorry. But we also observed that there was also a big difference between generations and how they view things,
Absolutely.
as well as genders as well.
Yeah.
So we found that the more mature age group.
That's a nice way to put it.
He told me to say mature. But we found that they're more planners, whereas we are more kind of spontaneous, go with the flow, kind of a crowd. Yeah, we multitask a lot, whereas the more mature group likes to stick to one thing at a time.
Yep.
We also found that a lot of these can be taken very situationally. So depending on the group you're in or what you're doing, these can kind of vary depending on what you're acting in right there. And we also found that it was very important to know where you stand in it, but also be able to change that depending on what culture you're in and how you're acting in there as well.
That's cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Those
Great
are some
job.
good words.
Thanks. Others? Anybody else want to share your conversation? Oh, right here. Yes.
Hello? There we go. Well, much like what you just said, something that we pointed out was that not all of these are mutually exclusive, particularly cooperation and competitiveness. Personally, I'm a firm believer that collaboration leads to success. I know that's something that we talk about in the collaborative leadership class that I'm currently taking with Dr. Wyden. And so while if you have collaboration, that's going to better prepare your group to be able to compete externally. But if you're competing internally, then you're just going to divide your group and not be able to accomplish anything.
Sure, that's great. One of the questions that we get sometimes, so if you actually took the assessment and you saw where your scores fell, so again, this was you sort of doing your own self-rating, but we have a tool that helps you process it more from an academic perspective. But sometimes when people score like high on collectivism and then high on competitive, they're like, how does that work? And like, it works great because it's just, they still want to win. They just want their group to win, right? So that's all that is. Maybe one group on this side over here. 2. So we'll do this table and this table.
Hello. So one thing we discussed was unconscious bias. So how in interaction, potentially a negative interaction you may have had with someone of a specific culture could unconsciously or even consciously bias you to future interactions with someone of that culture, and how it's important to be aware of that and not to base an entire genre of people on one bad interaction.
Yeah.
So.
That's fantastic. One of the things we talk about all the time is that balance between using this information as you learn about different cultures, use that information as a starting point, but don't profile people and don't assume that every single person in that particular cultural group may think that way or have that value. The goal is always to get to know the individual, but on your journey to do that, as much information as you can learn about that culture, it's a starting point for some good conversation. Table here.
Hello, my name is TJ. So what just happened was a few people echoed what I was already going to say prior to me speaking. And most people that know me, I plan ahead, I'm predictable, I do everything in a certain manner. But what just happened was I had to adapt to the situation that just happened and change my speech a little bit. Now, one thing our group honed in on was universalism versus particularism. And we have 2 criminal justice majors in our group, and they stated, one example that I did bring up was immigration laws, and how do you guys tailor it towards situational ship, basically. And they say, it should be universal across the board. And then another question I proposed following that was, should it be universal everything? And then my friend Donique right here brought up her being a teacher. And how does every culture in a classroom able to adapt to the culture of an American system?
Sure.
And how do you tailor everything so that every person is included within the conversation?
Right. Yeah, sure. Those are fantastic questions. Everybody hear that on this side of the room? And the key is to, you'll be amazed at, so I can't give you all the answers to those questions, but you'll be amazed at how many people don't even ask the questions. So that's the starting point to begin to even process. So you talked about 3 different disciplines there, the whole criminal justice system, you talk about education. So when I'm out in the business world or whatever, and I'm talking to teachers, it's that very conversation. You've got a diversity of students. This is the first time ever in U.S. history that in the public school system, the majority of kids are kids of color. They now make up more students than white students in our K-12 public system. That's huge in terms of the demographic shifts and how that's going to impact how we teach our children. So even just having those conversations is the key to beginning to think about what adjustments do I need to make as I'm teaching my students. And the same thing in terms of, like you said, those criminal justice laws. Fantastic discussion. One more table and then we'll move on. Anybody else? Okay, back there.
Hello, everyone, again. My name is Carolyn Aponte. We after we had the discussion based on the different aspects of cultural CQ, we went around the table because, like I said, my school is very diverse, and I just had students share what their ethnic background was. And what we found that was interesting is that people who obviously look different, were able to say, my student to my right is Cuban, one of my students is Syrian, but the people who had no idea what their ethnic background was, for lack of a better term, said they were American. And, what I said was, well, 90% of us are American at this table. We have 2 foreign-born students, but it's interesting to me how, even for myself, I was born in Miami. So we talked about how when people ask me, what are you? And I say American, that's not a good answer. I get the look of, no, but like, what are you?
Right.
And I'm like, and I play dumb, of course, I know exactly what they mean, but it's sad to me that people, present day, when you say you were born in Miami, whichever state, they still ask you, what are you? But as I said, can you stand for a second, honey? This is one of my seniors, Isaiah Ligari. He's the one that said he was American, to put him on blast. Oh, okay. You can sit, honey. So I asked him, do people, when you say you're American, ask you, but what else are you?
And the answer is no.
Because they look at him and they're like, well, duh, obviously.
That's what an American looks like.
And you talked about traveling abroad and, you see like a bigger difference than here. And when I was in Italy for 6 weeks, there was no question of what are you? That never even came up. And it's so interesting that present day 21st century in the United States, you still have people wanting to classify you as quote unquote what you are, even when they speak to you and they could tell that you were either born here. I'm from New York, so I might have a little New York accent or whatever, but I just find it disturbing at times that is so important to people for them to kind of move forward and get to know you. So I just wanted to share
that. That's a fantastic point. And by the way, 3 of your very brilliant students caught me in the bathroom and asked me some phenomenal questions. So they are getting this stuff. Very impressive. Great conversation with them. So great. It sounds like you all had some phenomenal, let's give them a hand. Thank you. Thank you. So it sounds like you all had some phenomenal discussion, and it's exactly what I was hoping for. Again, remember that you fill this out yourself. So if you were to take the assessment, your scores might look a little different. I heard someone say earlier, well, sometimes it's kind of better to be neutral. Well, it's interesting to kind of see where you actually land when you take the assessment. And even if you fall in the middle, so let's say if we think about the continuum of the individualism versus collectivism and you fall in the middle, it doesn't mean, some people look at that like, well, see, I've just got it like that. I just know how to ebb and flow. No, that's not what that means. It just simply means that you don't have a strong preference one way or the other. So So that's what that means. So in sum, as we wrap up this conversation around cultural values, a couple of things that I want you to make sure you get in your mind. So first of all, the whole idea behind this is that when you understand your cultural values, it gives you some sense of what your personal orientation, your preferences for how you go about life, work, and relationships, right? So when we talk about preferences, again, it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's how you prefer to go about life and work. Where do those preferences come from? How you were socialized, right? How you were raised, different experiences that you have or have had, right? And sometimes it shows up different on campus versus how it might show up when you're in your personal interactions with your family and friends, okay? But it's simply your preferences for how you go about life comes about from how you were raised, how you were socialized. The second thing that's really important, it may reveal biases that you have towards those whose values differ than yours, right? So you had some discussions around that. So if you tend to be more collectivistic and you're working with someone that's more individualistic, you might perceive them as being a lone ranger, not a team member. Right? Likewise, if you're more individualistic and you're working with someone that's more collectivistic, you might view them as not having enough personal initiative, right? So the list can go on and on and on of assumptions and biases that we can attach to people when they have a different preferred way of life, which came about based on their socialization and the experiences that they've had. So they are just different, right? They don't predict your ability to work across cultures. That's what cultural intelligence does, right? But what they do is give you insight about how to effectively work and lead across cultures. So if you recall, in the first part of our time together, we talked about the first two capabilities, CQ drive, motivation, interest, confidence in working across cultures. CQ knowledge, your understanding about how cultures are similar and how they're different. So what we just did through this exercise, we just spent some time beefing up your CQ knowledge. Right? So now you know a little bit more about your own cultural values, and hopefully in your conversation with the people at your table, you began to learn a little bit more about their cultural values, so and how you were similar and how you were different. So as you think about this exercise and you think about your leadership and the teams that you work with, can be a fun exercise to do with those members just to get some sense of what might be some of the cultural differences that are on the teams that you're leading and how might that impact your leadership. Okay? Great. So now what I'd like to do is shift and talk about the other two capabilities: drive, motivation, confidence, interest, knowledge, understanding about how cultures are similar and how they're different. Now strategy and action, right? So the first, strategy, that's all about your ability to plan and prepare for those interactions. So I've just developed some understanding. So imagine everybody at your table, let's say that's part of your team that you're leading. And you've now developed some understanding around what might be some of the cultural differences and similarities of your team. Strategy says, how do I use that information to influence how I am going to lead the team of people that are working with me or that I'm responsible for? We kind of break this down into sort of three ways of thinking about strategy. So it's that overall ability to prepare for those interactions. But one of the first steps when we talk about strategy is what we call planning. So again, that gets into what things do I need to know as I prepare for this interaction? So I've got a team of people. Let's think of a scenario. And we are going to go into the urban community on a community project. And it's going to be, with a wide range of people in that particular community. And we want to go in and make a difference and have an impact and partner with them. So strategy says, okay, so given that situation, what kinds of questions might I want to ask myself, or might we want to ask ourselves as a team, culturally speaking, to best position ourselves to be successful in that engagement? Can you think of a question or questions? What are their needs? Okay. What else? How do we find out their needs? And how do we make sure, as we're looking at their needs, we're not making assumptions about their needs, right? So I was with a group of MBA students at another school across the country, and we did this scenario. They actually, as part of their program, they go into a community. And we do these if-then scenarios with that group. And one of the scenarios we put out there was a student making a comment. They go out into this, they go out and they're engaged in this urban community. And one of the students makes a comment. They look around and they say, no wonder these people are in this situation. If they just worked hard just like me and got their education, maybe they wouldn't be in this situation. What assumptions did they make?
Those people
That they have similar experiences or lives. You never know. How do you know that they don't value education? How do you know they don't have an education? You don't know, right? Yes?
I think it's important to understand the values of that community.
The values?
Identity.
Mm-hmm.
And ensure that you're not creating an identity for them
Mm-hmm.
as you implement these and address the needs that they
Yep.
have.
So understand the values. So when you say, how do you figure out their needs? What are the values? Are there some cultural value differences, right? So that's one of the questions as we go into this. What might be some cultural differences here? How do we leverage that? How do we celebrate that? It's not about us going in and being anybody's savior, right? But how do we create a partnership opportunity where we can learn and grow from one another, right? But what are some of those cultural differences and how do we celebrate that and make sure that we understand that? What might be some other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ethnocentrism, yes.
Right. And then the second point is like basically asking them like where they see themselves and where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to make changes, you have to know where they're starting
Mm-hmm.
and where they want to end up going.
Sure, right. So avoiding the ethnocentrism and centricism. Get the word out, centricism. But finding out again what the needs are. So having that conversation, right? And how can we best support you, right? And do this in a way that, again, demonstrates respect. Hand over here. If there's subcultures. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yep, that's good. So understanding that there may be subcultures within that, right? So I think the first step is just being willing to ask questions rather than just going in and assuming you think you understand everything about what they need and not at all considering cultural differences. Yeah.
What are the roadblocks that are stopping them? If they do have the drive, they do have
Mm-hmm.
stuff to get to where they need to go, then
Mm-hmm.
is there something going on in that community
Sure.
that's external that's affecting them?
Sure. So what are the roadblocks? Yep, absolutely. And not assume that just because a person may not be in the same economic situation as you are, it's because they don't work hard or don't value work. Yeah.
Along with aligning with values, what unifies that community?
Mm-hmm.
Holds them together.
Right.
And maybe use that as an infiltration method to
Mm-hmm. Sure. So find out what unifies that community. Yeah, that's great. So again, it's all about asking those questions. I'm developing some knowledge and understanding around some of the cultural differences, but how will that show up in terms of how I actually plan for that interaction? So most often when I don't know how many of you have been a part of diversity training, but a lot of the diversity trainings that are out there, and there's some good ones out there for sure, but many of them stop at the knowledge, right? So they help us understand the cultural differences, but then we don't know what do we do with that information and how do we make sure that we use it in a way that's going to make us effective. So again, that's where strategy comes in. So that first step is planning. The second one is awareness. So awareness says if we play out that scenario, so we go into this community and we've taken some time to do some homework, we've had some conversations, we've tried to get some sense of what the needs are and understand what some of the cultural differences are. And so we kind of use that as a plan of action and we go in. Awareness says now that I'm in that situation, I still have a responsibility to be aware of what's happening to see if what we planned is actually working, right? So it may work and it may not. And am I being aware of the cues? So I assume that I can approach this person this way, and it becomes quite evident pretty quickly that they're not responding in the way that I thought, right? So awareness says, although I've planned for that interaction, I still need to be very sensitive and very conscious of what's happening around me while I'm having that situation to see if it's actually having some kind of impact or the impact that I had hoped that it would have. That third is what we call checking. And that's saying after you have that experience, reflect on it. What went well? What didn't go well? Whatever did go well, why do we think it went well? Whatever did not go well, why do we think it didn't go well? So there's that whole package of thinking about your interaction from a strategic perspective and being conscious of it going into it, being conscious of it while you're in it, and then also reflecting once you come out of the situation. Okay? So we talked earlier about unconscious bias and how that connects to cultural values, but I wanted to come back to it to really help you understand what we mean by unconscious bias and help you understand the role that it can play in our interactions across cultures. So I have two definitions up here because I like them both, and I think they build off of one another. But the first is when we talk about unconscious bias, they basically are unintended, subtle, and unconscious thoughts, and the words really should be that happen to all of us all the time. But we're just trying to be nice, okay? Unintended, subtle, unconscious thoughts that happen to all of us all the time. Another way to put it in terms of resources that you might want to check out, Dr. Banaji and Dr. Greenwald. Dr. Banaji is at Harvard University. We do a lot of work at Harvard, and she's familiar with our work. But she, along with Anthony Greenwald, wrote a fantastic book called Blind Spot. Anybody ever read the book Blind Spot? It's a great read. It's a great read. One of the best reads, I think, out there in terms of helping you understand unconscious bias. But they wrote a book called Blind Spot. So in terms of resources, if you want to learn more about this conversation on unconscious bias, I'd recommend you pick that book up. But their definition of it is these ingrained habits, or they call them mind bugs, of thought that lead to errors in how we perceive, remember, reason, and make decisions. Right? So there are these little mind bugs that are in our thoughts that if we're not careful, they can lead to errors in how we perceive, remember, reason, and make decisions. Thinking about that within the context of leadership, right? And they're very real. They're so real, there's extensive research that shows the relationship between unconscious bias and our brain. Bottom line, we all have biases. So it's not a question of if, it's what. We all have biases. What are they? Right? So there's a ton of research that shows that this just kind of highlights key parts of the brain that are associated with bias. So, for example, the amygdala, that is the part of the brain that deals with fear and threat. And that's okay because we all need that as a way to survive. You know, one example that they give, I think, in the book is, imagine you're standing and a bird comes kind of flying at you. The first thing you're going to do is duck, right? And that's just sort of instinct, right? So that's that mind saying, okay, watch, something's coming at you and it could potentially be a threat. So you want to protect yourself. So that's normal, and that's the way our brains were designed. The danger comes when we begin to make associations, negative associations with events and people that really have no foundation, and those negative associations begin to have a negative impact on judgments and decisions that we make towards that culture. So it's one thing for a bird to be flying at me and I'm going to duck because I'm associating that with potential danger, and I'd rather find out later whether or not it was or not. But it's a whole different thing if I see an African-American male walking down the street and I clutch my purse and I walk across the street because somehow something told me that there's this association between he's dangerous. That's when it becomes really scary, right? So the amygdala is the part of the brain that attaches flight, fear, right, and our desire to protect us. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that attaches our thoughts to our memories, right? So how does that connect to unconscious bias? So imagine you're watching the news, and they're talking on the news about building a wall. How about we go there? No. Okay. They're talking on the news about a certain culture, right? And they're saying, this about that culture, and you're constantly hearing it. And you're thinking, okay, I'm just watching the news. I'm not paying that much of attention. But then later on, you have an interaction with that culture. Your memory is going to go back to that last experience or those experiences that you had either by observing it or actually having that experience. And you're going to make that negative association with that particular cultural group. So it grabs a hold of those most recent memories, and it sometimes will attach negative thoughts about that. So the point when we talk about unconscious bias, one, it's real. We all have them. You'd be amazed at the unconscious decisions that you made from the moment you got up this morning until this point in time. Our minds operate in such a way, literally, there are at any given time 11 million pieces of information that are coming at us at any given moment. But we are only able to functionally process 40 pieces of that information. 40. So what do you do with the rest? So consciously, you can only process 40, but you have millions of pieces of information coming at you all the time. So it gets filtered through your unconscious. So, and then those influence decisions. So you made a ton of decisions when you got up this morning, when you decided, some of them were conscious, but even in terms of going to brush your teeth, when you walked in the room, where you were going to sit, you didn't have this massive deliberation in your head about that. You just made decisions, many of those unconscious. So you imagine all of those pieces of information coming at you at any given point in time. If you are not careful, you can begin to make decisions around those if you begin to attach a negative association. So one of the ways to understand, so the question is not if, it's the fact that I do have biases. We all do, in all different kinds of ways. The key is to recognize that when those biases show up, we don't have control over that first thought, because it's going to come, but we have a ton of control over the second thought. What do I do with it? Okay, so how many of you are familiar with the IAT, the implicit association test? Okay, so a few of you are. That is a test that was put together by a group of researchers at Harvard and at the University of Washington, University of Virginia. I'm going to give you the website a bit later for you to go and actually take it. It's free. But it is today one of, if not the leading, academically validated tool that measures our unconscious bias. So you can go in and take as many of them as you want to give you some idea of where you might have biases. So you can take one related to, just about every category you can imagine. So race is obviously one of them. That's probably the one area where they've done the most research over a long period of time. There's gender, there's political affiliation, there's weight, there's age, there's generational differences, disabilities, LGBTQ. Every category that you can imagine. You can take as many as you want to get some sense of whether or not you may have a bias towards a particular cultural group. So I'm going to challenge you to go do that a little bit later, but we're going to have fun with it now. So I need everybody to kind of turn and face me. So those of you that have your backs towards me, I'm going to show you a series of words. You're going to turn into robots. So when I show you a word, if you believe that it's the word on this side, I want you to raise your right hand. If you believe it's the word on this side, raise your left hand, okay? So the idea here is that the implicit association test, based on the research, basically suggests that when we see a certain word that represents a certain cultural group, we make associations with that group. The idea is that the faster you make the association, it gives us insight in terms of what your preferences are. So we're going to test that out now. So everybody should be facing me. You see a word on this side if you agree it's that word, right hand, this side, left hand. Ready? Okay. So here are the first two sets of words. Well, not yet, not yet. Okay. So I'm sorry. These are the two guiding words. I wasn't clear in my instruction. I'm sorry. Now we're going to give you some words, and you tell me, is it female, male? Okay? Ready? I don't see hands moving. Okay. Liberal arts or science? Science, liberal arts. See, you look just like robots. I love it. Okay. Female or liberal arts, male or science. Ready? He's concentrating. Male or liberal arts, female or science. It's so funny to watch you. Is this being filmed? Okay, good. It's going on Facebook. Just teasing. Okay, so this is an example of an IAT test looking at females in liberal arts and males in science. 75% of the people who took this test had a faster response time when male was tied to science and female was tied to liberal arts. Okay, So this is the whole idea of this association that we make and assumptions that we make, in this case, as it relates to gender. Yeah?
I have a question.
Yes.
In the test scenario, was it presented in the same way or was it presented in random order?
So when you are taking it, you're sitting at the computer and you're using your fingers, and this was presented in the order that I presented it. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yep. And they do make some adjustments, but it's all scientifically supported. So if there is any slight adjustment, that's been tested. You can trust that, right? So the idea here is that, again, when we look at our responses, the faster we respond to something is that association that we make. So you can take it as it relates to race, you can take it as it relates to gender, but it's a way to begin to at least expose potential biases. So for example, in all of the research that they've done, they've probably had the longest history around race. And there is clear evidence when you look at Americans as an example. Generally speaking, Americans have a preference towards white people compared to black people, as an example, right? So you may take one and it may be one versus a skinny person versus a person that's viewed as overweight. Do you have a preference towards skinny people? Do you have a preference towards someone of a certain political affiliation compared to another, right? So the key here is so the people then come back and ask, well, what does this mean? Does this mean that I'm racist? No, but what it does tell us, and that research supports, is that anytime you have a preference towards one group over another, it does predict the potential for discriminatory behavior towards that group that you have a lesser preference towards. Does that make sense? So if I have a preference towards a certain group and not a certain group, I have a lesser preference, then the potential of me exhibiting discriminatory behavior towards that group is high. So it does predict behavior. So the key is, again, recognize we all have biases. That first thought is going to come. What do you do with the second thought? So when you make that negative association in your head, how do I say, okay, that is not a healthy thought? Where did that thought come from? Did it come from how I was raised? Did it come from some bad experience that I had with that one particular culture group? Did it come from me watching the media and thinking that all people from that group behave that way? Where did that come from? Is that a fair association? And how do I make sure that I don't attach a negative association and then allow that association to have negative consequences in terms of judgments and decisions that I make? So if I'm leading a student group on campus and I'm recruiting people to be on my team, but I have a negative association about certain groups, is that going to impact whether or not I would invite them to be a part of my team? Is that going to impact, if they're on the team, how I make decisions about what role they have, what opportunities they get? If I'm teaching a class and I have certain assumptions about certain cultural groups, is that going to impact how I discipline certain students different than others, right? If I'm making the decision as a judge, and there's a ton of evidence that shows all kinds of discrimination shows up in those different disciplines. So it is significant in terms of impact. And sometimes we look at incidents like what happened in Charlottesville, and that's what we call blatant, right, explicit racism. And we think that's horrible, and it is, but unconscious bias can be worse because we don't even know we're doing it. And the consequences can be just as bad, and we're doing it all the time. All right? So that's huge. Another way, when we talk about bias and how that connects to our leadership, how does it show up? Microaggressions. And if you're familiar with that term, right? Microaggressions, the big discussion nowadays. We hear a lot about it, even on college campuses, right? So what is microaggressions? What are microaggressions? Subtle. So again, subtle, that's the key word. It gets dangerous because we don't even realize we're doing it. Subtle yet powerful. So subtle, semi-conscious, devaluing messages that we send out and that can lead to imbalances or inequities in our relationships in organizations or institutions. So an example of what a microaggression might look like on campus. So you imagine a faculty member, just true story. So all these examples I'm giving you are not like things we made up. They happen. So when you look at a statement like that, what assumptions might be, what hidden messages might be attached to a statement like that? Maybe the mic.
One of the assumptions could be that they assume that people from the Latino community would be in favor of immigration because there's a lot of stigma about illegal immigration coming from the Latino communities.
Sure. So the assumption that they have a thought about that, yeah. Did I see other hands somewhere? Over here. Alienation.
You're a different group and you're worried about immigration.
Mm-hmm.
You might have some.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so wrong.
So that whole idea of alienating a group, right? Or assumptions. I always joke and say, as an African American woman, if someone asks me, so what do you think black people think about that? And I'm like, well, yesterday when I talked to all 13 million of them, this is what they said. Right? What other hidden messages? Yes?
That all immigration is the same.
That all immigration is the same. And that this group might speak for everybody, right? So this is one example. This is a race or ethnic example, but you can think of examples across generations. You can think of examples, across gender. Anybody else, can you think, when you think about subtle statements, but over time can be very devaluing and can very much work against trying to create an inclusive environment. Yes? Ageism, that's a big one. Absolutely. Yeah, here. Classism, yep.
I think regional.
Regional, absolutely. Yeah.
Back to this example, an assumption that's made here is that all of the Latino students are immigrants when they can be U.S. born.
Right, that's right. So all kinds of assumptions, yeah. And when you say regional, you're thinking about across the state or, yeah, absolutely. One of the things we talk about, I'm from Michigan, and just on the west side of the state, I'm from Grand Rapids, and the east side of the state, Detroit, two very different cultures, right? So absolutely. And then somebody mentioned earlier the whole idea of subcultures even within a culture. I saw a hand here. Nope. Right? Anybody else can think of another, when you think about the subtle devaluing statements, not intended to harm, so it's not attacking or making anyone feel guilty, but the reality is that these statements can have negative impacts and implications. Comment? Yes, that's good. So if you're a Hispanic student, you have alternative views about it, then you might be looked at as you're not a real, right? That's good. Another example, if you think about if you step outside of race, but you think about physical disabilities, right? Or someone that may have a learning disability, and the teacher says to the person when they walk in, I'm going to have you come sit up front and make sure you get all the attention that you need because I know you have a disability, right? Right? It happens. Yeah.
Does it have to be negative? Because what I'm thinking is, a fellow student said, well, I'm glad our math teacher is Asian because he will be good at the class.
Sure. That's more of a, that's not negative, but it's an assumption that may or may not be true, right? And it's an assumption that all Asians are smart, right? And I'm not saying that they're not, but it's that assumption, right? So again, it goes back to where does that come from? Where has that, society tells us that, right? And then it gets dangerous when there's a negative association attached, perhaps with other cultural groups. That group is lazy or that group, whatever. Yeah, saw your hand there.
When people say, I'm not racist, I have black friends.
Sure. What about that happens all the time and it doesn't guarantee? And again, this is an important thing to understand the conversation. So it's not about making any particular group feel bad. It's the point is that as we talk about developing our cultural intelligence as leaders, we want to make sure we are managing unconscious biases, particularly those that attach negative associations to certain cultural groups, right? And that expands beyond race, ethnicity, gender. It's very broad. Generational differences, regional differences. In addition to that, part of the way unconscious bias can surface is through these subtle microaggressions. And they show up all the time. Yeah.
Also creates, I think this statement also creates the concept of a dominant and a subordinate. So it's a debate. It's supposed to be amongst peers.
Yep.
And everybody's on an even playing field. Their opinion should all be valued.
Sure.
And I think that by saying I expect that Latino students will argue in favor of immigration creates that connotation that it's going to be the wrong argument, and also that now, if you are
Mhm.
Latino, you cannot argue for anything other than that.
Right.
Otherwise, you will be acting
Ostracized.
Yeah, you
Sure.
will be ostracized and acting against my dominancy.
Exactly. So let's take that out of the classroom. Let's imagine you're leading a team, right? And you all are, one of the hot issues on campus is immigration. So you bring your group together and you want to have a conversation about this and see what you can do as a student organization to address this issue. How would you say this to your team in a way that does not come across as being a microaggression, but to create some positive dialogue? So how would you say something like this differently? Leave out the second part. Yep. Let's have a conversation. How do you all feel about it? What's your position? I'm going to create a safe space in case you have a different view than what I might assume you might have. And I'm going to create a space for some courageous conversation that is open to any, and no one's going to be judged for it. Okay? One of the other responsibilities that you have as a leader, as a student leader on campus, is to avoid what we call the bystander effect. How many of you are familiar with that? Have you offered any bystander effect training here at all? I know a lot of campuses are doing more and more of that. So who doesn't know what the bystander effect is? Okay, very few people. So it's that whole idea of saying, I'm not going to get involved when I see someone in crisis or a situation that really demands attention. I decide I'm going to stand on the side and let somebody else deal with that. If you're going to be student leaders here, right, and you look at the myriad of challenges and things that come up as it relates to cultural differences, you cannot be part of that bystander effect. You have to be part of the solution, leading again, and encouraging and facilitating those courageous conversations. Because if you have a campus environment where you have unconscious bias running rapid, those negative associations, you have microaggressions happening, and you've got people, the leaders, taking on that bystander effect, one of the consequences of that is what we call covering. Familiar with that terminology? So the idea of covering is that when people don't feel safe in a space, so we talk often about our college campuses being diverse and inclusive. Diverse and inclusive. And I always give definitions. So I say diversity means inviting everybody to the party, right? So you're welcome to come here. Inclusive says giving everybody a chance to dance. So am I invited to the party, but I really am not thriving. I really don't feel included. I really don't feel like I can dance. Or if I can dance, I have to dance the way you want me to dance. So it's more simulation, right, than it is truly allowing me to bring my whole self here. So when we don't create this inclusive environment, and as student leaders, part of your job is to help create this inclusive environment for all students that are coming on campus, to do that in a way that prevents people from feeling like they can't bring them. You need to do it in a way where people feel like they can bring their whole selves, right? When they don't feel like they can bring their entire selves, they do what we call covering. Okay, so covering is basically this way of hiding parts of who you are so you can feel comfortable and fit in. 4 different types of covering. Appearance-based covering. That deals with how individuals alter their self-presentation in order to blend into the mainstream. Okay, how might that show up? African-American female student might wear her hair straight versus natural because she doesn't want to be perceived as being too militant. Right? Affiliation-based covering concerns how individuals avoid behaviors that are associated with their identity. Right? Another appearance-based, talk about generational differences, an older white male might dye his gray hair so that he doesn't be perceived as being irrelevant and too old and not know anything. That's another form of covering. So it crosses races, crosses genders, crosses all different kinds of diversities. Affiliation-based covering concerns how individuals avoid behaviors that may be widely associated with their identity, often to negate stereotypes about their identity. So let's say you have adult students on campus. So an adult female student with a family might avoid talking about being a mother because she doesn't want other traditional students, right, to think she's less committed to her education or work. There's the advocacy-based covering. Right, concerns how much individuals stick up for their own group. Right, so someone that covers in this area, an international student might refrain from discussing issues around immigration, right, for fear of being asked, being viewed as a rebel, or even worse yet, being asked to leave. Right, association-based, an LGBT student may intentionally not hang around other LGBTQ students for concern that they may be ostracized for their lifestyle. These kinds of coverings show up all the time on campuses when we don't create an inclusive environment. And again, your role as leaders is to help minimize that. So when we talk about CQ strategy, so this is all a part of it as we talk about planning for those interactions and being aware of whether or not they're working and then reflecting on those. All of these are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about as a leader to make sure that you're being effective in that. The last thing when we talk about a strategy for impacting unconscious bias is what we call perspective taking. And that is known to be a very good strategy for minimizing bias. And what we mean by perspective taking is putting yourself, not just having empathy, so it's not just about, oh, I can only understand how you feel, but it's actually thinking the way that person is thinking. So how might Sandra actually think about this particular situation or circumstance? That goes beyond how I might be feeling. So it takes the emotions off the table, but how might someone that is coming at this from a completely different perspective, how might they really be thinking about it? And just taking that step to do some perspective taking can have a huge impact on our ability to manage our biases. The last one, CQ action. So that's all about adjusting our behavior, right? Verbal and nonverbal. So the first one is our speech acts. So how we say things, how we give feedback. A really quick example of that, my neighbor is from Germany and moved to the United States when she was 18, didn't speak any English, and has lived here ever since. Her family still lives in Germany. So her mom was here last Christmas holiday. She speaks no English. While she was here, she had a heart attack. And so they had to take her to the hospital, and she was in the hospital, and during the day, things were going okay. She's doing great today, by the way. But things were going fine. They had an interpreter come in the room, and she was getting the care that she needed. Well, in the middle of the night, she started having pain. And so the nurse came in, and you know how they do on a scale of 1 to 10, kind of tell me how you're feeling. 1 meaning I'm doing great, 10 meaning I'm not doing great at all. So she goes on a scale of 1 to 10. So she goes like this, and the nurse starts to walk out of the room. She's thinking, oh, she's doing great. So, and good thing my neighbor's husband was in the room, and she goes, no. She's just starting to count. In Germany, 1, you start 1 with the thumb. Here in the U.S., when we start counting, how do we count? We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in Germany, this is 1. So not understanding those cultural kind of acts in terms of how we communicate, what could have been life-threatening for her. Thank goodness he was there, right? Verbal communication, so how we say things, right? That's huge. So understanding how you might need to communicate with one culture group might be very different from how you communicate with another culture group. We talked about indirect versus direct communication. If I'm more of a direct communicator and I'm interacting with someone that's more indirect, how might I need to adjust how I communicate? One of the ways I always challenge people to practice that is imagine yourself having on your team members who are more indirect. So for 1 whole week, when you're emailing somebody, email in an indirect way. And see how challenging that is. It's not easy. You have to be conscious of it. But it's a great exercise to really allow you to see how you need to adapt how you communicate. Okay? And then the last one is the nonverbal, right? So when I'm interacting with someone from another culture, what are some of those actions, those nonverbal actions that are appropriate and not appropriate? So 4 capabilities as we kind of wrap up, and then I'm going to let you get into your discussions. 4 capabilities: CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, CQ action. Drive is our motivation, confidence, interest in working across cultures. Knowledge, our understanding of how cultures are similar and how they're different. Strategy is my ability to plan and prepare for those interactions. Action is all about how then do I adapt my behavior. I want to show you a video. Let's make sure the sound is ready. And as you watch this video, I want you to be thinking about how did this person, how culturally intelligent are they? Go for it.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
How was his cultural intelligence? 0. Drive, knowledge, strategy, action. How was his drive? I would say he was pretty motivated, right? Was he confident? Yeah? Okay. So he had an interest. So I would say if he probably took the CQ assessment, his drive would probably be pretty high. I'm guessing, right? Knowledge, understanding of cultural differences, how they're similar and how they're different. How did he do with knowledge? What's that? Very poor. How so?
Well, he had, like what you said, he had unconscious biases. He looked at her and automatically, thought she wasn't from there.
So his knowledge was low because he had biases. He made all kinds of assumptions about her that he had no clue were there, right? How else was his knowledge low? It was limited to the restaurant. Okay, yeah. And then what about strategy? So knowledge, understanding of cultures, how we're similar and how we're different. So you think any of his knowledge was accurate? No? Okay, so strategy then is taking that knowledge and planning for that interaction. So how was his strategy? Right? Extremely poor. What did he do wrong? I need more details, people. Everything. When I ask people, what would be a culturally intelligent response? They said, just don't say anything. Just keep walking. That's the culturally intelligent response. Action then is adjusting your behavior, right? So what behaviors are appropriate or inappropriate? What was his action like? Did he have any appropriate behaviors? Yeah.
Definitely taking the answer that she gave at face value, right? So if she says San Diego, he could continue the conversation respectfully by saying, oh, tell me about that.
Right. And he went, exactly. Yeah. Anybody else in terms of action? Okay. So you can, yeah, here.
I was going to say, kind of going back to strategy, that he had a lack of awareness.
He had a lack of awareness. That is so powerful because, again, we talk about strategy, so preparing for that interaction. So in his mind, he thought he had some knowledge about her culture, but then there was no awareness. So remember we talked about awareness is once you get into that situation, what you thought might work might not. But you've got to be aware, right? So if he would have paid any attention to her body language, to her and her words, he would have adjusted in that situation. But there was no awareness. That's phenomenal. It's a great point. Right? So this is a good example of you can be motivated. Remember we started out with that? You can be motivated and interested, and that's important, right? But that does not, you cannot stop there, right? You got to understand knowledge and then take it from there. How did you like her flipping it? Comment? Yeah, comment.
I love the way she flipped it, but I feel like he didn't realize what she was doing.
Sure. She was weird still. Right. Yeah, and he didn't get it. He didn't get it. I saw a hand back here. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, what is the most appropriate way to ask what
where a person's from, like their ancestral heritage.
So what is an appropriate, the question is, what is an appropriate way to ask a person where they're from? And, we have fun with this and laugh with it, but again, your role as leaders is to make sure that you're creating space for conversation where we're not trying to make people feel stupid or feel bad. It's all about learning from one another. So creating a safe place where a person can ask, well, what can I ask you? How can I ask that question? Let me hear from you. So what's the best way to ask someone about their cultural background? Over here.
Well, usually I like to say where you're from, and then if you notice that that's not the race, I usually go, what nationality are you? And then that will bring it, okay, well, I'm from here originally. My family came over to America from there. That usually sparks up a conversation.
Sure. Yep. So you start out. And another way to think about that, that's great. Another way to think about it is just, tell me about your background. What's your story? And most of us have more than one story, right? Because we come from different places and there's several things that make up our identity, right? There's that whole conversation on intersectionality today. So just, what's your story, and make it a little bit more generic, and then you grow into that as you are developing a relationship with the person. So as we wrap up, what does the culturally intelligent student leader look like? So if you were to take the CQ assessment, you would get a score based on 3 categories, what we call low, moderate, or high. The low is the light gray, the moderate is the dark gray, and the high is normally on the assessment would be like an orange color. But when you start thinking about it, what does this actually look like? So a person that has a student leader that has low CQ, you would tend to react to the external stimuli. So you see things, you hear things in a new cultural context, but you judge it based upon your own cultural context. So your way, your preferred way of life, engaging your values, all of that gets filtered through that one lens, right? So you tend to view cultural differences as either irrelevant or you just ignore them altogether. If you have more of a moderate level of cultural intelligence, you now start to recognize some cultural norms, right? And you start to accommodate them into your thinking and behavior, so they start to filter into your knowledge and your strategy and your action a little bit. You're motivated to learn more about how cultures are different, but you may experience the desire to still focus primarily on what people have in common. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you stay there, then you miss out on this whole opportunity to leverage, collaborate, and leverage and celebrate the differences, right? High CQ, you are flowing, right? You adapt, you adjust your thinking and behaviors to other cultural norms as needed. So when you go into a situation like that and you see that the person is not responding, you're able to adjust. You don't even have to wait until you get to the reflection stage, but in that awareness stage, you can see this is not working and I'm so sensitive to it, I'm going to adjust. Right? So you adjust, you adapt and adjust thinking and behaviors to other cultural norms as needed. You draw upon those differences to drive innovation and effectiveness, right? And at some point, those interactions become automatic and subconscious. That is where we all want to be. It's a journey, it's a process, but we can all get there because CQ is malleable and is adjusted. What number was that? 5 minutes. Okay, great. So with that, you are going to head into your if-then scenario activity. I'll let your leaders describe the details around what you need to do. But I will say again, when you look at those scenarios, those are real life situations of things that have happened on our campuses. Once again, some great conversation. We obviously won't have time to get feedback from every single table, but the goal here was to have you process these very real situations that happen on our campuses and think through culturally intelligent ways to respond to those. So hopefully you did. I'd like to at least, a couple of tables, it was broken down where different tables received different scenarios. So what I'd like to do is at least hear one response to one of the scenarios from a total of 3 tables. So we'll start on this end, and maybe the group way in the back over there, maybe you all could highlight the one scenario from your from your group and what you identified as some culturally intelligent ways to deal with that.
Okay, so we'll talk about scenario 1. Yes, and scenario 1 was regarding a student from an underrepresented group who complains that they feel isolated and not a valued and celebrated part of the campus community and the organization you are leading. They are considering leaving the college. So what we did was we referred back to activity 1, and we realized there were 2 contexts operating at the same time here. We had the being context, which is that this person is being isolated, and then we had the doing, which is that they are considering leaving as that action. So then we decided what was our goal. Do we want to plead for them not to leave, or do we want to help alleviate that feeling of being isolated? So we started with asking, why do you feel that way? We need to know the source, because there's probably something deeper in that being aspect. And then once we get some knowledge about what that is, we ask how we can help, and then strategize ways to address the situation in the organization. Take that as an opportunity to open up the platform to the rest of the group that I'm here for you, so that way it doesn't feel like we're giving this person special treatment. That that's something we open to the rest of the group. We want to be cohesive here. Reevaluate after we take actions that we can. And then at the end of the day, respect that person's decision to make that choice. If they decide after we try to change something that they want to leave, that's their choice. We've done what we can do, and it's on them now.
Sure. But the fact that you're willing to reach out and ask those important questions, those are very culturally intelligent responses. That's great. And being inclusive with the others, right? So I think that's fantastic. And there may be resources that you already have. That person maybe has just not tapped into those resources. There may be some resource groups that are available to them. So just stepping back and finding out why, like you said, is huge. That's a big part of that conversation. Excellent. Thank you all. Thanks for sharing. Okay. So let's come to the middle of the room, and maybe we'll do this table here.
So our scenario 1 was they aren't doing their part. So first of all, the scenario says
everyone didn't get that one. So can you read the whole scenario?
Where is it? Students are working on a team project with a very diverse team of peers. Every time they get together, there's a disagreement about their priorities and timeline. Some are worried about getting the project done in time.
Okay.
So first, we realized the personality just by reading it. So just by reading it, we saw that the leader kind of had a long-term goal, if that makes any sense. So a long-term goal, first of all, and second, kind of a direct approach, so hierarchy level. So we kind of saw it, in order to solve this situation, simply start with communication. So communication is a really important factor in this scenario. And then to do that, it's changing your leadership style in general. So it seemed like it was more direct approach, and he was, or he or she was kind of leading people to do that. Maybe people are not, they're intimidated by that. So instead, equaling yourself to that personality of theirs, and then realizing that factor. So simply just having a short-term goal instead of a long-term goal. So realizing that importance, and then on top of that, realizing that every student has qualities within them that can bring to the table. So from multiple perspectives on our table, we were saying a lot of times that we were the leaders and we were controlling, and that was stressing us out. So instead, share the leadership. Don't take it for yourself. Share it and realize that everybody has their own personality. So using that and contributing to the table. So instead of you overseeing everybody, everyone oversees their own work. One's good at typing, one's good at research, one's good at presenting, one's good at speaking. Utilize that. And by seeing that, you have this kind of strength within the group. So you
Mhm.
unify it, and it just makes more sense to do that rather than overseeing the group and having to do everything your way and like individualistic approach. So more of a community base.
Sure.
That's what we
That's
thought.
excellent. And I love the idea of, again, communicate, because, you know, even when you hear statements like they're not doing their part, well, how are you even defining, you know, we all have come to the table with different expectations around not only what needs to be done, but how it needs to be done. So let's step back and communicate what the goal is and then how we're going to get there, and celebrate that different people get to things in different ways, right? And cultural values can play a key role in that. So that communication piece, adjusting your leadership style and understanding what the differences are, what strengths people bring to the conversation, to the project, are all very good culturally intelligent responses. That's very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And one table over here. What table have we heard from?
All right, so we're going to take scenario 3, which was a TESOL score.
Mhm.
So you have a group of students, and they are having a project, and they have an international student in the group who is a little bit difficult to communicate with. There's a little bit of a language barrier. As a result, some of the students are actually begrudgingly working with that international student. So, what do you respond to this with? Well, first of all, we said that there are different methods and apps that you could use to be able to communicate with this student better. You could use translation apps, for example. That would make it a little bit easier to get some points across. Or you could just play off of their strengths. If they're really good at PowerPoint for the presentation, well, they can use PowerPoint. That's kind of more universal. If they're really good at mathematics, math is a universal language, so they could use that instead. So play off their strengths. We also said that if the students are asking about, like, what is your TESOL score? That's a little bit of a microaggression. You're asking, like, what was your score when you passed a English test? That's not very nice. So we'll actually tell them to not do that. Additionally, you need to also keep in perspective that it is difficult to learn a language and that it is not their fault. Now, it takes two to communicate, and so we find that it is important to try and communicate with this person and to recognize that they are also making an effort. And if you just say that, hey, you come over to America and you need to learn English as a result of it, that yes, I understand that they need to come over and they need to learn something. That is their part. They are learning a little bit of English. Now it is your turn to try and communicate back with them. And so that's what we came up with for the scenario 3 of the TESOL score.
That's excellent. Wow, great job. Thank you. Very good. Couldn't have said it better myself. I love that idea of being flexible and teaching, looking at what strengths they offer, and being flexible in terms of recognizing, again, that language for any one of us, if we go into a new culture, is not always the easiest. So how do we slow down and adjust and not hold that against them? Very good. So hopefully, again, these are all scenarios that you should be familiar with or probably have seen and heard because they happen all the time. If we were doing a longer training, I'd actually have you come up with some on your own based on your experiences. But again, hopefully this helped you understand these kinds of issues. How do you begin to respond to them in culturally intelligent ways? How do you begin to respond to them in ways that, again, remove biases, don't bring in microaggressions, and allow you to be that much more effective as a leader across cultures? So great job. Thank you for that. So as we wrap up, you all have in the middle of your table little 3x5 cards. If everybody can quickly grab one. And as the grand finale here. So remember, I started out by saying there's really 3 things I wanted you to get out of our time together today. Why you need to be culturally intelligent student leaders. Do you feel like you know the why now? Why it's important, right? Understanding the influence that cultural values and unconscious bias have on leadership effectiveness. And then the last thing I want you to be thinking about throughout the morning was, what are 2 things you can do to improve your CQ based on what you've learned? So just a couple of ideas here to get your juices flowing, and then you can come up with your own. If you don't, if you've not taken the IAT, go do that. That's the website up here on the screen. It's free. You can do as many of them as you want to, and it'll spit out a report for you that shows you if you have any preferences or you make certain associations with different groups. Be intentional in your cross-cultural relationships. Simple things. Be intentional about having lunch with someone from another culture. I know that may sound simple, but it can actually be quite powerful, especially if you go and have lunch and the idea is to take on perspective taking. So I'm purposely having lunch with you just so that I can learn about your culture, learn about some differences, and think about how you think about things as it relates to different issues on campus. Try new foods, right? Map out the cultural values of your team and or peers in your class and leverage that diversity. So for those of you that are already leading different groups, do this exercise, do the cultural values exercise with your team, see where you all fall, and use that information to inform how you're going to create a great strategy for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Same thing with your classmates when you're working on group projects, right? Spark a conversation with your team about covering. Have that conversation. Do you find yourself covering here on campus? And how does that show up, right? And how can I, as a leader, help minimize those feelings that you have in terms of you not feeling like you can bring your whole self to the campus? So just a couple of really simple, practical things that you can do that can just keep you moving on that journey to becoming a more culturally intelligent leader here. And with that, I know, I think Rick is still coming up with a few more final comments, but my time is up. You all have been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to punctuate the applause that we just received here for our keynote speaker today. I don't think we could have asked for a more compelling or a more informative narrative than what we've got today from Dr. Upton. I think she's raised the bar a little bit for those of us who are engaged in the intentional study of leadership. And so I would ask you all one more time, please join me in a round of applause for our keynote speaker. This concludes the formal portion of our summit today. That doesn't mean run for the door. Okay, a couple comments that I would like to make, please. And before I do, I want to ask Corey if you would please join me on stage here. Get up here. Corey Hilliard is our event coordinator, and she's done a spectacular job with all of the background, all of the hard work. You know, her office is right across from mine in the Taylor Leadership Institute, and I had about as little to do with this as any director would. She did it all. She made it look easy. And I just got to tell you that I'm so grateful that we've got her on our staff as the event coordinator. And Corey, thanks so much.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
And I want to thank our table captains. As I walked around and listened to the various conversations during the Activity 1 and Activity 2, I was struck not only with the contributions of the students at the table, but also with the facility of our table captains to kind of lead and steer the conversations in the direction that we did. And I think that as part of our table captains' contributions, we have gotten much more out of this experience today than we might normally have. So, lunch is in room 3804. It's strategically placed across from the restrooms. Okay, so, and the veranda is open out there as well today. So if you want to trundle through, get your lunch, you can eat out on the veranda. You're welcome to bring it back in here. The human race machine is a human race experience machine, I should say, is open and available for you to experience. We have our photo booth outside in the lobby as well, and for those tables that have bonded and you want to get that picture, please do so. Sandra has agreed to hang around for a little bit and take pictures as well. And so if you wish to have your picture taken with Dr. Upton, I think that she'll accommodate that. And finally, a reminder, the sign-in sheets, table captains, if you'll please collect the sign-in sheets up. And for all at your table, before you depart, we ask you to complete the evaluation forms that are in your folder so that we can take whatever observations that you have, factor that into next year's summit, and ensure that we deliver a product that will be more meaningful to you in the future. So, in addition, for those of you who wish more information on the leadership minor, we have a couple of information sessions coming up next week. And if you want to chat with Dr. Frank, who will be leading those sessions, he'll be circulating around during lunch as well. Now, following this presentation today, Dr. True Leverett from the English department is going to be providing a lecture for about 40 minutes over right across the hall in 3605 on the topic of beyond identity, which is a very natural and logical adjunct to what we've just talked about here today with respect to cultural intelligence. So thank you all very much for joining us today. We're grateful for your participation. Thank you for your time and attention. God bless you. Go forth. Have a great weekend.